Ladies and gentlemen, our service today, honoring the life of Howard Klein, will be officiated by Rabbi Shlomo Seidenfeld. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones and other devices so they will not disturb the service. Thank you.
I can't begin to convey the depth of the honor that I feel to be here. I did not know how. I went to Israel with Daddy. That started our relationship. And fast forward, I'm here in a role that I cherish. To be here to honor his memory and to comfort his family, as we all are. But we're not only here to be moved by his passing, we're here to be moved by his life. To be inspired by it, to be challenged by it, to be humbled by it. So we're here to honor his memory, but we're here for ourselves as well. Warren Buffett was once speaking to a group of investors, and the title of his talk was How to Live a Rich Life. I can promise you no one was in that room was expecting to hear what he shared. He shared that to live a rich life, you have to be lovable and trustworthy. Everything else pales. Howard was very successful in his professional field. He was a pioneer, from what I understand. But the words that keep on reverberating, the words that you'll hear more from the family, is that he was a mediator, that he was a mentor, that he was into volunteering, that he was a proud Jew, that he was a giver, that he was compassionate. That's a rich life. That's a rich person. That's someone. I'm here not just to honor his memory, I'm here to learn from him. And I never knew him. Do you know, names are not random. And especially Jewishly, names are not random. The name encoded in a person's Jewish name is the identity of that person, the essence of that person, of that soul. Do you know what his name was? Chaim Shlomo ben Yosef. Chaim Shlomo ben Yosef. Chaim, the word for life. But here's the thing. The word for living is chai. The word for life, which is singular. Living. I'm living. The word for life in the grandest sense is chaim, which is in the plural. You're only alive if you have other people in your life. If your life is lived in plural, not in singular. Your husband, your father, your grandfather lived that life. He was exemplary. I'm not speaking from knowledge. I'm speaking from what has been conveyed to me. He was an exemplary person all the way around. Father, husband, grandfather, mentor, friend, you name it. So I stand here in awe of him, challenged by him. I don't know about you, but when I'm at a funeral and you're hearing the eulogies, and you're hearing the rabbi speak, sometimes your mind starts racing and you think to yourself like, do I embody those values? Am I living those values? Chaim Yod Shlomo Ben Yosef. My name is Shlomo, by the way, so that's just another random. I'm so honored to be here. So honored to honor the memory, to elevate the memory of someone who I never knew, but who represents who He was a Jewish pillar. I needed this. We needed this. The people best equipped to convey the depth of what this man represented, or Howard represented, or his family. Before I call on them, I'd like to ask everyone to find their booklets. It's under the bench in front of you, actually, right. And please turn to page 7. Psalm 23. Let's read it in English together and then I'll read it in Hebrew. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Mizmor LeDavid Adonai Roi Lo Etzar, Binos Deshen Yarbizeni Amen Nuchos Yinahaleni, Nafshi Yeshoved Yancheni V'Mal Tzedek Ma'at Shemo, Gam Ki Elach B'Gates Ha'Oretz Lo Ira Ra Ki Ata Imati, Shivtecha Mishantecha Hema Yinachamuni, Taroch Levanai Shofla Neged Zorerai, Dishanta Vashem Roshi, Kosi Rivaya, Ach Tova Chesed Yirlefuni Kol Yimei Chayai, Mishavti B'Beis Adonai L'Oret Yomi. I'd like to call on Rosalind and Danny.
Shalom, everyone. I'm so sorry we have to meet here on this occasion. Let me take you back in time to June 30th, 1961, when I arrived in Los Angeles at the age of 18, eager to see what lay ahead of me. I lived with my Aunt Patsy, whom we called AP, and Uncle Aubrey. AP wanted me to meet a nice Jewish boy, so she set me up on a blind date. She was working at the Federation Building at 590 North Vermont Avenue, and had a friend who was a Rebbitzin, who had a friend named Rose Rappaport, who had a son named Maud, and Maud you here today. Howard just returned from Fort Ord the day by Greyhound, February 10th, 1962, and was extremely tired. It was a rainy night, not in Georgia, but in Silver Lake neighborhood, and Maud prevailed upon him to take this English girl out to a going-away party for a mutual friend as he was taking another young lady. Life had its ups and downs, but I'm proud to say that we never had a falling out in all the 62 years we were together. Our union produced two amazing children, Susan and then Danny, who have been my rock during these last few years. Susan married our other son, Danny. I'm sorry, Steve. And our other daughter, Imran. We have 4 fabulous grandchildren, Gil, Joseph, Joey, Kareem, and Joshua, Josh. We worked together at the law offices of Howard Klein and later at FMBK, where he was a partner. Whenever I was asked how we could survive working together, my answer was always, Howard had the say-so in the office, and I at the house. We hardly ever quarreled, and when we did, the squall was always very quickly over. No matter what I did in my life, he always encouraged me to exceed my goals. Howard was my lodestar, my confidant, and best friend. I will always cherish and love him to all my dying days. Good night, dearest Howard. All my love forever and ever. Mercy. Thank you.
That was amazing. For those of you that may not know, I'm Danny. I was Howard's son. My dad is gone, and I'm going to miss him so very much. Dad once shared with me that the finest compliment a man can receive is to be considered a mensch. Mensch is Yiddish for a person of integrity and honor. It can be seen in a man whose actions and motivations are pure and proper. A man who does all the right things for all the right reasons, regardless of recognition, compliments, or reward. Dad spent each of his 87 years perfecting the act of being a mensch, though it was no act.
Dad was everything a family member, friend, or business associate could ask for. He was a brilliant man. He was a caring man. He was rational and prudent. He was a giving man. Howard Klein was unmistakably a remarkable man in so many ways. He worked his butt off for over 50 years as an immensely respected attorney. I'm not sure anyone had a bad thing to say about Dad, apart from the myriad poor souls who found themselves on the receiving end of his surgically precise litigation skills. Dad had a lifelong love of chess. He would study books with every move from various matches throughout history. Years ago, Dad shared a story with me about a client who loved to carry around a wad of $100 bills in his pocket for show. For a particular deposition, he told his client to have an exact amount of money in his pockets, down to the penny, totaling well less than $100, not a penny less, not a penny more. When opposing counsel asked Dad's client how much money he had on him, the client emptied his pockets with that exact amount, not a penny less, not a penny more. It was on that day that Dad defended his title of Grandmaster. Checkmate. Dad, you were the best. Here's her here. Here's the emotions come in. Gotta be a real bad. Dad, you were the best sonny to your folks, Joe and Ida Klein. The best husband to your beloved wife, Rosie. The best dad to us kids. And best lady to Gil, Joey, Kareem, and Josh. We all love and continue to love you very much. So very much. Now for the superfluous non sequitur, strategically included to make this admittedly spectacular eulogy even better. I can honestly say with pride and affection, big words, superfluous. Susan was Dad's favorite. She was so much like him. And Dad, if I'm being honest, she'd be my favorite too. The running joke, okay. The running joke with my best friend in high school, Mike, was that I must have been switched at birth because it was impossible I could have come from him. Dad rarely swore, but when he did, it was always appropriate and often for effect. Dad never smoked, he rarely drank, and didn't gamble. He led a fun, honorable, noble, straight and narrow life. And although I've mellowed in these later years, I, on the other hand, love the drag of a good cigar, a few fingers and more of a hot rye, driving like a bat out of hell, and sitting at a craps table in Vegas, betting the dark side. Now for the elephant in the room. At 87, my dad may have died of old age, but he spent the last few years of his life suffering from the effects of advancing Alzheimer's. With that, our family's experience with Alzheimer's was far better than most. Right up until the end, Dad remembered so many of us by name. If he couldn't recall a name, he knew us by sight. And most importantly, Dad never wavered in his love and devotion to any of us, especially my mom. Dad was thoughtful and caring right up to the end. Every question was answered with a deeply thoughtful response. He may have taken a while to process his thoughts, but not a single answer was generic. The answers always started with a, well, let me think about that. And then he would give you his honest take. Among my fondest memories was a road trip he and I took a few years back before his illness got really bad. We rented a car for comfort and drove around town reminiscing. We drove by Grandma and Grandpa's old apartment on Genesee, Fairfax High School, and other memorable haunts. We had lunch at Cantor's Deli, followed by a trip to see his beloved parents here at Mount Sinai, and ended the day with a Chicago deep dish at Gino's East. He loved it. I loved it. It was a magical day I will never forget. Moments before he passed, I held Dad's hand in mine, and we looked into each other's eyes. Dad was actively transitioning, and we both knew it was time. I told him how much I loved him. and he tried in vain to speak to me through his strained breaths. Dad didn't utter a single word. But I got the message loud and clear. He loved me and I loved him with all my heart. 2 days before Dad's passing, his unexpected passing, fairly unexpected passing, Joey, Josh, and I met Zadie for what turned out to be their last visit, sorry. He was weak, but he still had a spark in his eye. Right before we left, I leaned in, I gave him a kiss, and I told him he was the best dad ever. He looked at me, thought for a moment, and replied, "Well, I don't know about that." I got the joke and replied, "Well, if I'm being honest, Dad, you're pretty much the only one I've ever had, so you may be right." He got the joke. He got the freaking joke. In the end, and in no particular order, Dad left Mom to pieces. His sweet parents, Joe and Ida, Susan, Steve, and Barb, Gil, Joey, Kareem, Josh, me, a refreshing sip of cream soda, and a tasty sweet treat. When all was said and done, Howard Klein was a family man. He would often get choked up and say, "I am so fortunate to have such a loving family." His last great joy was having his family by his side. I close with this. He lived his entire life with integrity and honor, always doing the right things for all the right reasons, regardless of any personal recognition, compliments, or reward.
So true.
My dad, Howard Stephen Klein, was a mensch.
Maybe come on, Susan.
Before I start with my prepared words, I'd just like to say how my dad would love this. Everyone gathered here, maybe not on this occasion, but he just loved people. He loved everyone. He loved all of you. So I'm really happy you're here for him. My dad was an extraordinary man. He was warm, thoughtful, caring, and brilliant. He touched each of us in different ways, and not just with his famous bear hugs. I invite each of you to reflect for a moment on what my dad meant to you and how he impacted your life. My dad was a role model of love, devotion, and integrity. He was a loving only child to his parents, Joe and Ida. He was a wonderful husband to my mom, and they recently celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary. And Dad was a terrific father. Through all of life's ups and downs, Dad's devotion to his family never wavered. How lucky we were to have him. Dad was so welcoming to those who joined our family. When I was a student at UCLA, we hosted a young woman from Germany whose father had died young. Dad and Gabi developed an instant, lifelong bond. And Dad lovingly welcomed the kids and grandkids that were added through Dan's marriage to Invar and my marriage to Steve. Dad and Steve truly became like father and son as the years passed. Even as he was declining, Dad would say things like, "Steve is a very beloved Klein. Steve, besides being a relative, you're a wonderful, wonderful friend. Steve, you are one of the finest people I've ever met. And very recently, I have a very patient son-in-law." Thanks, Dad. Dad never cut corners or shirked his duties. As an attorney, he represented every client with excellence and compassion. I can remember 2 occasions as a child when our small family of 4 attended the funeral of a client who had died without anyone to mourn them, so they wouldn't be sent off alone. Dad mentored younger attorneys, wrote scholarly legal articles, was a certified probate specialist, and was on the California State Bar Probate Committee. As you heard, he and my mom worked together when he was in solo practice, and they never seemed to get fed up with each other. I think they knew to leave work at the office and not bring it home with them. After Mom retired, Dad continued working as an attorney until retiring at age 77 from Feinberg, Mindell, Branton Klein, FMBK. Dad loved the law. He often said that law school was the worst 3 years of his life, but the only career he could ever imagine. We worried about what Dad would do with himself after retirement, since he didn't have many hobbies. But we needn't have worried. Dad found new purpose in retirement. He joined in intellectual discussion groups like the Plato Society and the Salon, and he volunteered as a home visit companion with Rose Room Hospice. One thing you'll notice is that these are all social activities. Dad loved people, and that never, ever changed. Dad exemplified charity, service, and volunteerism. He was in the Army as a young man, and apparently was appointed to drive around a colonel, who promptly nicknamed Dad Pothole Klein, because he said, "Klein, if there is a pothole, you're gonna find it." And long before his work with hospice, Dad was very involved with B'nai B'rith, having achieved the position of District 4 Grand President in 1980. Dad taught me to love so many things. He enjoyed different cultures and would share words and phrases from many languages he'd been exposed to. As a random example, he could say happy birthday in Estonian because of a dear friend from his university years. Of course he taught me, Palle unne sunnepäevaks, if I recall. And most of you know how deeply that love of languages and cultures took hold in me as well. It has been said I'm very much my father's daughter. Dad also taught me to play backgammon, and our mini tournaments were a tradition until a couple of years ago. Dad usually won, even towards the end when he wasn't quite as sharp as before. He was that good. When I was a young girl, Dad shared his love of Scottish bagpipe music with me, but we could only listen to it when Mom was out of the house, since the high-pitched droning sound gave her a splitting headache, understandably. Dad also got me into folk music. Most special to us was the music of Gordon Lightfoot, and we attended a few of his concerts together back in the day. On our last night together at home, Dad and I played an Alexa Songfest of Gord's music, and it's a memory I will treasure forever. God bless Gordon Lightfoot and his repertoire of 1,000 songs, because on that night, Dad and I got to discover new songs together even after 50 years of listening to his music. Some things that Dad tried to instill in me but didn't take were his love of spicy foods, sports, chess, and most sadly for him, the law. I know he secretly harbored the hope of having a family law firm, Klein, Klein, and Decline. The FMB heroes cracking up. Okay. Dad shared his knowledge of the night sky with me and could identify esoteric stars like Altair, Arcturus, and Aldebaran. Even after I moved to Arizona, we would each look at our own night sky and experience astronomical events together. And driving through the dark desert on Saturday night, I gazed up at a moon with stars, and I shared one last night sky with my dad. Near the very end, Dad was less communicative, but when we would leave at the end of a visit, he would lock eyes with me with such a poignant expression, as if to say, I know you need to go, but I wish you would stay. So Daddies of my heart, we know you need to go, and we wish you could stay. We will take care of Mom, and we will love you and cherish your memory forever. Giamo Pai, I love you, Dad.
Thank you, comments. Steve, sign off.
a tough act to follow. I needed to talk today about Howard because he was very special to me. So let me say that I met Susan for the first time February 17th, 2002, and I hope she's impressed that I remember that. I had the pleasure of meeting Howard, Dad, for the very first time 2 months later in April. I was pretty nervous. Of all the women in the world, I picked the one whose dad was a super lawyer. A super divorce lawyer. Did that make me not smart? But as they say, the heart wants what the heart wants, and I was already falling in love with Susan. It was too late. There was no turning back. I developed a plan and it was simple. I needed to find some things that we could have in common. I knew he loved sports, in particular baseball and basketball. Bingo. I knew for certain both of these games used balls, and I was pretty certain that the two balls were different sizes. I could fit right in. He also had a keen sense of fashion, always looking for that perfect shirt or tie to go with his new, well-fitted suit. Bingo again. Similarly, I had pretty stylish jeans and t-shirts in a wide variety of colors. We did ultimately find things that we had in common. We both liked to discuss world events. We started a new and adventurous ritual of picking a wine to try with dinner. And more importantly, we both loved his daughter. He just needed to know that I was a good guy and that I would treat his daughter well. As a father of two daughters myself, this I could easily understand, and I could live up to that. When Susan and I got married, he spoke to us about the benefits of estate planning and was quick to assure me that he would provide the very best advice for us as a couple. It would be unbiased, and I always felt that that was the case. Over the years, Dad demonstrated that he was a mensch, a kind, thoughtful, honorable person with integrity. He served as a role model for me, and I grew into a better person by following his example. He was in many ways a better father to me than my own. He loved his family dearly, and I became a part of that family, knowing that he loved me too, and that it made him proud, something my own father seemed to have difficulty with. In recent times, I can recall him telling me that I was more of a son than a son-in-law. He told me that I was one of the finest people he knew, and that was very meaningful. Even more recently, I was visiting him in the Fastenal shirt that Susan picked out for me. He looked directly at me and said, "I really like your shirt." I couldn't help but smile because I knew he meant it. I also knew that this evolution was about much more than my shirt, and I'm sure he knew that too. I'll remember all that I learned from him. I will miss him always and forever. While I wish he didn't have to go so soon, I'm comforted knowing that he left in peace, knowing with absolute certainty that I would take excellent care of his daughter for forever and even beyond. Dad, go knowing that I loved you dearly, that I will never forget you, that you are the very best father could be to Susan and to Dan, but also to me. Rest in peace, you earned it, you deserve it, and I love you.
I'd like to call on Howard's oldest friend, Morton Rappaport.
It is. Isn't that awesome? that you lose a close friend of 70 years. It isn't often that you keep a friend for that long. Howard was that friend through the ups and downs of life. We kept our relationships and we shared our stories and many times on problems. Howard Stephen Klein was born on May 21st, 1937 in Chicago. He arrived in Los Angeles a few years later with his parents, Ida and Joe Klein. They immigrated to Los Angeles from Chicago. We met each other 17 years later, in 1954, as we entered our first year of college at UCLA in Los Angeles. It so happened that we were both assigned lockers in UCLA's famous Royce Hall, and the lockers were located next to each other. In addition, we discovered that our homes were really just blocks from each other in Eastern Hollywood. Howard was a boy of great intelligence, with a warm heart. He loved sports, but was not an athlete. He loved chess and other intellectual pursuits, and had a native curiosity, which served him well later in life. His wife, Rosalind, came into his life a few years later as an immigrant to the United States from England. Rosalind and Howard made a great team. They were married in Los Angeles in 1974 and proceeded to create a family of 4, with first the arrival of Susan and later Dan. We were best men at each other's weddings in 1966 and 1964. We both entered the Army and served at Fort Ord, California in the 1960s. Howard graduated UCLA and entered UCLA Law School. Graduating with honors, he then began a long, satisfying career in law, specializing in wills, trusts, and estates, ultimately opening his own law firm. He established himself as an expert in his field and received a number of awards. We attended each other's events and continued to live in Los Angeles for the next 60 years. I've always considered Howard to be my best friend, and I will miss him sorely. Rest in peace, old friend.
There's a phrase in Judaism, in Hebrew/Yiddish, that describes the soul satisfaction that a person feels when he sees his family thriving. That phrase is nachas, if you've ever heard it before. I can tell you Howard is feeling that right now, having heard the deep, sweet, profound, loving eulogies. A thought occurred to me as I was hearing with this, I'll close before our final prayer here in the chapel. I said in my opening that names are not random. His name of Chaim wasn't random. His name Klein isn't random either. Do you know what Klein means in Yiddish? Small or modest. Your father embodied that. He had much to be vain for. He could have been a vain person. He was a humble, modest servant to his family, to his community, to the Jewish people. And now he's passing the torch. And I have no doubt, I don't know all of you, I know his son. I'm slowly meeting the family. I have no doubt that you'll be up to the task to take that torch and run with it. And by doing so, you will elevate his memory and elevate the world through him, through his memory, through his legacy. There is a prayer, it's a powerful prayer. Usually the rabbi says it in English, in Hebrew, and inserts the Hebrew name. But I want everyone to really experience the prayer themselves and offer it themselves. It's on page 20 and 21. So we're going to read it in English at the bottom. Insert his name in the appropriate place, and then I will chant it in Hebrew. Please rise. O God, full of compassion, please join me, who dwells on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of your divine presence. Among the holy, make your glory shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the onward climb. Who has gone to his eternal home, author of mercy, bring him under the shelter of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. May you be his inheritance, remains with those be in peace. Amen. El Malei Rachamim Shochim Amomim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachas Kanfei Ashchina B'malos Kedoshim V'Torim Tizor Arakim Azim Es Nishmas Chaim Shlomo Ben Yosef Shahalach La'olamo Began Einen Tehim Menuchaso L'chein Ba'al Rachim Yasterei B'Seisef Yavav La'olamim Yitzor B'Tzor Achanes Yishmaso Adonai Nachalaso V'Yanu B'Shalom Ha'mishkava V'Nomar Amen. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a few moments, Rabbi will conclude the service at the gravesite. In a few moments, we will be exiting the chapel through the doors up here to your left. Once you have exited the chapel, please immediately make your way to your vehicles and wait for the Mount Sinai parking staff to release you into the procession line. Following the service today, the family invites you to gather with them at the home of Ingvar and Danny Klein. The address will be 24420 Victory Boulevard, Unit 7 in Woodland Hills. We have printed the address and directions for you, and they will be available as you exit the chapel. In addition to the gathering today, there will be evening services held at the same residence Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday evenings at 7:30 p.m. sharp. I will now announce the casket bearers. we have Danny Klein, Joey Klein, Josh Klein, Steve Sandler, Ron Rappaport, Hershey Weissman, and honorary casket bearers will be Morton Rappaport, Barry Goldman, Alan Cook, and Art Kassan. Family and casket bearers, please remain seated as the guests exit the chapel, and once they have exited, we will escort the casket. Guests, please rise and begin to exit the chapel up this way.